Job quitters of Reddit. What was the straw that broke the camel's back? I worked in a Starbucks ripoff in a bookstore, and my manager was a real. She picked up a second job, and for a period of 3 weeks, started calling me every single morning to tell me that she needed me to open for her. It started as, just open for me. I'll be there within an hour of opening. That lasted 3 days. Then it pretty much went from me opening and working until noon, being off for 4 hours, and then coming back in and closing. 3 weeks in a row, I worked damn near 70 hours. No days off. Every day I was supposed to have off. Sundays. She called me in. Then I got my paycheck and it was way short. I was making $8 an hour and all I got paid for was my full-time hours. Not a single mention of the 30 hours of overtime per week. So I went to the cafe manager and she got all twitchy and kept saying it was a mistake with corporate. I got suspicious, so I went and talked with the actual bookstore manager and he said, "Wait, you worked overtime? When was this? Nobody asked me for approval. I don't believe this. I need to see your time card," or something similar to that. By this point, I was really pissed and felt like I was getting the runaround. Went to the cafe manager, told her the store manager needed to see my time cards because he hadn't approved any overtime for me. She freaked the duck out, started chattering at me in some Asian language. Turned out she had falsified her own timesheets to look like she'd been working the opening shifts I'd covered for her. She got canned. I ended up getting even more overtime since we were now short-staffed, and then some people from corporate came in to do an inspection or whatever. The very first thing that happened was some lady in a suit walked into the cafe, walked behind the counter, and turned off the radio and walked away. Now, I'd been assured by the store manager we were allowed to have a radio, as long as it was low, and we only played from an approved list of CDs. I had no problem because there were some good classical CDs in the list. So I turned the radio back on. Karen came back over and turned it off and said, "This hasn't been approved by corporate, it needs to stay off," and walked away. This was my 5th week working 7 days a week, around 70 hours a week. I was beyond pissed. The money was ducking amazing for me at that age though, which was the only reason I hadn't quit yet. I finally got called back into a meeting with the people from corporate where they wanted to express their blah blahs for the scam that had been pulled and thank me for being a team player and picking up the slack. Did I mention that I was basically managing the whole cafe for the 2 weeks since the manager got fired? Timesheets, processing the register and cash drawers, scheduling, attempting to train potential new hires, ducking retards, all of them, like seriously ducking retarded, ordering new stock, basically everything a manager does without the pay and title. So the corporate people asked, finally, what I thought we needed to do to remedy the situation with the cafe. So I outlined a basic plan where, since I had already been interviewing people and doing some basic training to see how they handled themselves, I would pick up 1, possibly 2 new hires to fill out the schedule so everyone got full time and days off. I kind of just assumed that I would be continuing on in the managerial position. So I said something about promoting someone to full managerial status, at which point one of the corporate goons cut in and said, "Oh, that's okay, we've already narrowed down a few candidates to manage the cafe, so you don't need to worry about that." I kind of paused and said, "Wait, you're hiring someone brand new and not promoting internally?" And their response was, "Well, yes, but since you've been doing such a good job, we were hoping you could show them the ropes and get them off to a good start so you don't have to worry about that stuff anymore." I just kind of stared at them and then said, "Okay, I'm done here. I'm out." And it's no wonder this place is a revolving door for managers and employees, given the way you seem to be running it. I look forward to reading all about your failure in the newspaper in a few years. Stood up and walked the duck out to their stunned expressions. Store manager called me the next day offering me a raise if I'd come back. I said, "Duck, no." 3 years later, I gleefully read about their company going bankrupt and being bought out by another chain, who promptly just took all their stock and liquidated it in wholesale, dirt-cheap pop-up bookstores. Story 2. Probably my best job quitting event took place when I was 16 and working concessions and box office in a movie theater. The job was actually okay. The work was easy and I got to go see free movies pretty much whenever I wanted. Then we got in a new manager who, without a doubt, the worst manager I've ever had in my life. She would make us pay out of pocket for every discrepancy in our drawer. Bear in mind, we were making $5.25 per hour at the time. There were no locks on our drawers. And a few people later discovered that she made a habit of stealing from everyone's drawers and then making them pay for it. Eliminated all our movie-watching privileges, we now had to pay full price, and would stand on our line and scream at us in front of customers for every slight mistake. The final straw, at least for me, came when I was working the box office with a line out the door, and she came up with her infant son in a car seat, placed him in the box office with me, and told me to watch her kid while she did some paperwork. So I had to deal with a huge crowd of people while an infant screamed in the box with me. She then had the audacity to come out and yell at me for not taking better care of him. I got my revenge, though. Me and 6 other people quit the day Star Wars Episode 1 came out. We actually came in to watch her struggle with it and laugh at her. Glorious. Story 3. At Pizza Hut, I was an assistant manager at 19. I had my 2-week notice in, but was still pulling a double on a busy Saturday afternoon. Had a district manager at the store doing some paperwork. A buddy of mine that also worked there but was off the clock came in and popped the cash register to change out $1. The DM saw this and wrote me up. I chuckled and informed her that I was suspended pending termination because I had 2 other cash violation write-ups. I was laughing as I grabbed all of my stuff, knowing that this district manager who has never actually worked in a store now had to run the store for the next 12 hours, and there was a pay-per-view boxing match on that night. Usually means a very busy night. As I was leaving, my best friend at the time, our best cook, was coming in to clock in, and I told him I was leaving and fired. He immediately told the DM to go duck herself, quit on the spot, grabbed a 2-liter, and we both left together. Story 4. I worked as a valet parker and bellman at a hotel in the area one summer. Cool job, got along solid with my coworkers, etc. My manager was a reasonable, chill guy. We worked 5 10-hour shifts a week with 2 days off. Towards the end of summer, my manager took his 2 weeks of vacation and left the temporary manager from hell in charge. Now I had an understanding with my old manager. My fiance at the time, not anymore, cheating escort, had sickle cell anemia and had crises every couple of months. I told my manager up front, and he told me if she ever needed to get to the hospital, to get one of my coworkers to cover for me, and I could go take care of it. It hadn't actually happened yet in my 4 months of working there, but it was a possibility. So new manager's managing pretty terribly. He understaffs my afternoon shift 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. It was just me and my buddy Russ to cover the entire hotel. Normal staffing for that shift is 4 of us, so we are half-staffed. Fine, extra money, extra hustle. Unfortunately, hotel policy states that somebody has to be in the box guarding the guest's key box all the time, reducing our effective number to 1. So I go and tell the new manager this and ask him to come sit outside and guard the key box so me and Russ can work. He writes me up for insubordination, not joking. On the form he put, questioning the methods of his superiors. I'm not sweating it. I'll just address it with good manager when he comes back. So we get one of the desk clerks to come cover the key box, and me and Russ are killing it. No breaks, no anything. My logs show I valeted somewhere in the neighborhood of 220 cars that shift. A busy night was normally around 150. So anyways, mid-shift I get a call from a guest. They locked themselves out of their room with the chain and went out from the neighboring room of their suite. The maintenance guy with the thing that gets rid of door chains isn't there today. Boss orders me to go into the neighboring room of the suite, climb out on the balcony, and hop over to the other balcony to see if their balcony door is unlocked. We are on the 9th ducking floor. The balconies have a 3-foot gap between them. I'm tall, but if I duck this up, I'm muerte. Plus, the people in this room didn't tip when I took their luggage up, so duck them. He writes me up again, tells me my shift is done, go home. I go downstairs, and I go back to helping Russ park cars. I'm not leaving him solo during dinner hour. I'll go home and be 1 day suspended after the rush, or when relief gets there. He won't notice. He rarely leaves his office. So anyways, once things get dead around midnight, I go home. I come back in the next day. New boss has posted the schedule for next week. He has me on the schedule for 7 days, 16 hours a day. Seriously. He tells me that some of the staff has scheduled vacation, and I have to pick up the slack. Now I'm all for hours and money, but even I need a break. Russ feels like he owes me a favor after helping him out last night, so he offers to fill my Thursday shift so we both have a day off. We go into the new guy's office, fill out the schedule change request form, hand it to him, and he rips it up, looks me dead in the eye, says, "You work what I tell you to work." Russ is speechless. I am too, but screw it. It's a week of hell, but I'll make money and good boss will be back at the end of it. Of course, that's the day my fiance gets sick. I call up one of my coworkers, tell him what's going on, and he hauls ass and gets there in about 10 minutes. Really solid guy. I go into the office to tell new boss that I'm leaving and why, but that I already got relief. He tells me that he doesn't believe my excuses and that if I leave today, not to come back. So I'm beyond furious. I go outside, talk to Russ and Brandon. I apologize to them and tell them I really have to duck up his day. I take the master keys, lock the box that holds the valet keys, take my tips for the day, and split them between Brandon and Russ, because they are about to make zero money. And I take the master set of keys with me. On my drive home, I roll down my window and throw them into Galveston Bay. Nobody can get into the bell closet, the valet box, the break room, nothing. And since Brandon wasn't authorized to be my relief, he went home. Russ, nice guy that he is, refuses to break hotel policy, which requires one valet guard the keys at all times. So he sits in the chair next to the locked key box and refuses to move. When customers come out and complain, they get referred to new boss. He quit 2 days later, and when my good boss Came back from vacation, he offered me my job back and purged the write-ups from my file. Story 5. I am beaten down and my will is gone. I feel like I will not be able to find employment and therefore stay with this job. I do not hate my job anymore. I accept it. I laugh when I get told certain things because I accept it. I get paid okay now. My main thing with work was job satisfaction. I would take a pay cut to see my website succeed, but they keep getting redone over and over again. Sure, I make money redoing it, but I am so dejected now. Now, I'm not going to get too much into this, but I'll skirt over the keynotes. I work in an office of idiots. Actual idiots. Their marketing policy is basically, we have enough money to throw at the walls, whatever sticks, we'll throw more money there. I wanted to make a blog about crap my coworkers say. It's mind dumb. Mind dumb. I work in the web department. I design their e-commerce websites. The programmer quit, and the work I keep getting promised never shows up, so I always have to do it on my own. I have a project manager that does not give me anything but says that I know how he likes things done and trusts me to get them done to his satisfaction, all the while crafting on my designs and work, while I keep telling him, it's not finished, it will look good when finished. I have a team of salesmen that do not know what they are doing. They make sales because I made the sales for them. Their sales tasks is to go onto a comparison site, see what the competitors are charging, log into our admin side, change the price so it's cheaper, and hit save the system I built. Sends it over to the comparison site, modifies the price, and we move up in the ranking. Their main job is to answer the phone. My job is designing the website. What I actually do, 1, design the website, 2, code the website. Because the programmer left, I actually learned to program a bit enough to set up the website, which was a plus. 3, create all content for the pages. No content writer, and when my project manager supplies me with content, it looks like a 5-year-old wrote it. 4, fix everyone's email. 5, provide technical support for all networking. Even though there is a networking technician in the office, surprise, he's my project manager. 6, deal with any accounts we have open. I tell the technicians that I'm my boss. I open the accounts and modify them, something my boss is supposed to do. 7, to some extent, I do the job of everyone in the office, minus the actual shipping of the products, the purchasing of the products, and the talking to customers. But when they have a technical question, they do get passed on to me, which happens once a month. I should just start hanging up on them. 8, once in a while, does NTO happen anymore? Since I told my boss I will not do it anymore. I originally did these while I was in a dead mood. I was essentially just so yelled at and feeling down I did it. Then only realized after a few weeks the severity kind of sunk in. Redacted, it was straight up illegal. My boss has me employed as a consultant, so he does not need to pay payroll taxes, nor any benefits. Last year, I declared I made $18.5 thousand salary. My boss told me I should be making $70,000 a year. I did some of the AdWords accounts on the website. My project manager did not want me opening up AdWords. He called it a waste of time. I begged my boss to give me $50 a day to invest in AdWords and set up an account under my personal name. He did, and I set up the account. After a couple of days, we started making some serious coin. I asked him to bump it up to $150 a day. I made my company $120,000 in the first month. I asked for commission because I know I could have made more in sales with tweaks. I asked for 2 months every freaking goddamn day. After 2 months, my project manager told me the boss agreed and would be giving me commission. I just wanted $1,000 extra a month, 1%. The comparison sites gave us $50,000 a month for a total of $180,000 a month. After another 4 months of me asking every day, I accepted the fact I would not be getting commission. I made some changes as my project manager requested, which I would have done had I been making commission, and now my AdWords account makes $230,000 a month in sales. The sales footwork I had done, which was denied originally, makes more money than all 4 salesmen combined. The commission I was supposed to be getting goes to my project manager. The beginning of this year, I've decided duck it. I'm a consultant. I gave myself a raise. I raised my rates to $25 an hour. I bill for my research time. I'm making about $1,000 a week now, but I need to keep a big chunk aside for taxes. I could set up a website like my boss has, but I am missing a few things. 1, a company. 2, the product. The purchasing of the product is a very guarded secret. 3, fear. My existing boss will find out and he will sue me, thinking I've stolen from him. Like I said, I'd quit, but I've kind of sunk into this little hole and lie to myself that everything's all right. Story 6. I was working so much that my 8-month-old daughter did not know who I was, and my wife would cry every night because she felt like a single parent. I didn't know my own schedule as I was salary, and I left when the work was done. Story 7. My boss's son. I worked for a small, really great pizza/Italian restaurant for 7 years. I loved the job for the majority of that. That is despite the crap pay that was late 99% of the time. because my boss was crazy irresponsible with his money. Nope, I let that crap slide for 7 years because I knew that my boss was a good dude who really did care about his employees. You always hear Italian places say something along the lines of, "When you're here, you're family." And I have to say, for a long time, it felt like that. On top of that, I absolutely loved the work. We weren't one of the crafty pizza places, so we made everything from scratch and used stone ovens, pretty much non-existent in this city. It was simple work, but something about it satisfied me to no end. About 5 years in, though, the boss's son moves up from Florida. At first, he seems really cool, regardless of having felonies for massive prescription substances trafficking and the illegal purchase and sales of full auto machine guns. For the most part, he seems chill, though. As time went on, the depth of this guy's problems became very apparent. Not only was he a complete junkie, but his temper was out of control. On top of all this was the fact that there were some serious daddy doesn't love me issues and an aggressive sexuality that manifested in trying to duck the women who worked there and treating them like absolute crap when they turned him down. For about a year and a half or so, he tried to work at the shop. Every time it would last about a month before he either walked out or his parents finally told him to duck off, which never lasted. It literally made my stomach turn working with him. To make matters worse, his mom always stuck up for him to my boss, even though the son treated her like crap. It was madness. He was constantly selling substances out of the store and getting in loud arguments with everyone. Al, while not working, but claiming to be the best worker there. He would actually say things like, "My dad is the boss. I can do what I want." This is a 30-year-old man. Like I said, I had already been there half a decade when he showed up, and I had become very close to my bosses. This, no surprisingly, led to a sort of rivalry between me and him, or rather, him doing everything he could to duck with me and me not caring, because duck him, I had been there forever. He would do the most petty, ridiculous crap to try to either get me in trouble or make me mad. One day I cut my finger really badly. I told him and asked him to finish my shift so I could go get stitches, he said. Sure. Suddenly, when I go to leave, he flips crap on me and starts yelling about how I'm a pussy. I remind him of our agreement, and he no crap looks at me and says, "I agreed to work because I didn't really think you were gonna leave." I don't even respond to that and start towards the door. On my way out, G starts following me, yelling, and basically chases me out, though I wasn't running. After that, I told my boss I couldn't sew anymore. It was him or me. My boss chose to keep me and assured me he too had had enough of his son's crap. There are about 6 months of bliss where everyone is genuinely happier at work, and the store runs noticeably better. That is, of course, until about 2 months ago, when he slowly started being put back on the schedule. Having already gone through this more times than needed to deduce that it was hopeless to try and stop it, I put in my 2 weeks to the place I had dedicated the last 2,000 plus or so of my life to. Duck it. If they want him there, that's fine. I'll try my best to wish them well when they shut down. Story 8. Worked for a nonprofit that had insane expectations for fundraising. When I started, I had 8 weeks to organize an entire event. This was an event that had happened in years previous, but nothing had been prepped for that year. I was expected to net $32,000. I had just moved to the city and knew no one. I had no training, first job out of college, and the organization did not have a national template for me to follow for this event. My boss refused to help in any way, shape, or form. He refused to give me any contact information of businesses or previous year's donors. The person before me did an absolute crap job of documenting anything at all. My boss had an event that he coordinated, and he loved being the office superstar. So he refused to share contact info, but since we all had our own fundraising quotas, sharing contacts wasn't exactly encouraged. A week before the event, my boss's boss came down to see how things were going. Hint, not well. I was then berated for working on this $32,000 fundraiser at all, as it wasn't a national event. No one told me I had the option of not trying to pull off a dinner, show and auction, silent auction, and live band fundraiser, to concentrate on the other fundraiser that was 6 months out. That fundraising goal was $60,000. This other fundraiser was as much of a disaster as the last. I hated begging for money in 2008, when the economy totally tanked in the Midwest. I was trying to get blood from a turnip and didn't have any tools to begin to know how. Being told you have 8 months after being hired straight out of college to raise total $92,000 with no training or tutelage is a sign you are probably in the wrong place. There was no training in a meaningful way. I was sent to one weekend conference in DC that wasn't helpful at all, mostly because I was so worried about my event in 2 months and that workshop was on the next event. Oh yeah, they sent me across the country 3 days after I started. I was still learning my way around the office and didn't have my own email address yet, and they sent me to a training seminar. I was expected to create 2 new events from scratch. One that was a nationally led event, the other was totally local. I was expected to find committees, find financing, find sponsors, participants, all of it, with no direction on if what I was doing was right. I finally had enough after my second event which only brought in $42,000. My new boss, my boss by that time had been fired, absolutely berated me and tore me down that my event was a total disaster and a failure. I had been documenting what I had done on the other two events, contacts, committees, etc. The morning of my chewing out, I'd come in early and printed off my 2 weeks' notice. I had lost 30 pounds, a lot of hair, had no social life, was working 60 plus hours a week, easily, wasn't sleeping, was crying on my way to and from work, missed my family like crazy. It was the worst 8 months of my life. Other things that happened at this job, if it looks like a pyramid, it is a pyramid. My boss hired escorts for a golf tournament. The office was across the street from a methadone clinic. My boss was fired for embezzlement. Total office turnover during my 8 months there. The branch was shut down totally a few months after I left. Millions of dollars were spent just in the 8 months I was there on absolute nonsense. I will never donate to this particular organization or any other national nonprofit after seeing what goes on behind the scenes. Story 9. It was my first job out of college. I had worked there for a year, and my boss made a huge deal about how I was getting a raise and for being a wonderful employee, blah, blah. There was a cake and everything. When I get my next paycheck, I received a whopping 24-cent raise. I put in my 2 weeks' notice the next day. Story 10. I used to work at the copy center of a large chain office supply store. I should clarify, though, that while my official title was copy shop specialist, I spent 90% of my time on the floor stocking, cleaning, or selling pens. There were 3 of us working the print shop when I first started, but when the girl above me left, I didn't get to take her place. Instead, the managers thought it would be better if they personally helped my supervisor with his daily tasks instead of the guy with several years of printing/reproduction/graphic design experience. I was in a pretty crafty place at the time. I had an engineering degree, but couldn't find a better job, so I stuck it out. Over time, they start hiring new people, so instead of me on the floor all the time, they start having me close up the print shop. This usually meant me coming in an hour or 2 before my supervisor left. He'd leave at 5, I'd get there at 3 or 4, and staying till 10. Now I should note that our company had this policy that if you worked 6 or more hours, you were required to take a half-hour lunch break around your 2nd or 3rd hour working. This will be important later. Meanwhile, in my personal life, things are getting crappier. A family tragedy makes me take a week off from work. They were nice enough to let me take an indefinite leave of absence to deal with it, so that's nice. I even heard from a girl I worked with that they all signed a card. After I get all my crap sorted out, I go back to the daily grind of working until a few weeks later. The girl that I was friends with tells me one day that she saw the card they all signed sitting under a bunch of crap on the manager's desk. Normally I wouldn't care, but things were pretty emotional around that time, and it just made me feel bad. A week later, still no sign of card. Whatever. Now to get to the point of this post, the final straw. So I show up to work one day at 3. Supervisor is leaving at 5. This gives me enough time to catch up with what jobs have come in and what needs to be done before close. 5 o'clock rolls around and he leaves. After about half an hour, I'm caught up enough to be able to take my lunch break, so I call over the radio to tell manager, "Come, why haven't you taken your lunch already? You should have gone before supervisor left. Now I have to watch the print shop." Me, I would have, but the schedule had me coming in at 3, and I can't just work for half an hour, then go to lunch. See him yelling at this point. "Look, you really need to be managing your time better. I'll watch the shop this time, but you have to do a better job with your time." Me, "Look, if you really need me to stick around, I don't need a lunch, but if you want me to go before supervisor leaves, just go take your lunch." So I go, but I don't leave quite yet. I can't just leave all the jobs for the day unfinished. That wouldn't be right for the customers. I come back and finish the work for the night without saying another word. The next morning I was supposed to open, but instead of waking up at ass o'clock and putting on my company polo, I call right as I knew the manager was getting to the store and tell him I won't be coming in. Ever. I'd like to think that at least for that week, somebody else may have finally been able to work a full 40 hours. Story 11. After being pounded with 80 to 100 hours, 6 to 7 day work weeks for months on end, I gave a 2-week notice to the company. Big box office store you've heard of, that ends in max. In those days, managers could manually edit employee time cards and vacation time. Some of the guys that busted their ass for me, I added as much overtime and vacation pay as I could to their profile without garnering an alarm from HR. They pocketed a few grand and an extra week or 2 off each. I told them, "Hey, if your paycheck statement looks a bit off, just know it's on purpose." Obviously, I bloated the hell out of mine as well. The next week, sometime midweek, I had been working about 12 hours so far that day. To make a customer happy, I took a delivery to their house in my car. I was heading back to the store at about 7 p.m., and my mind was racing with all the things to still do that day. I sat there at a stoplight, waiting for the green to come, and I had a moment of clarity. In the middle of thinking over and over, "Oh, I've got to do this, then this, then this," my brain stopped and said, "No, I don't. I felt a whole year worth of stress just leave my body like the most satisfying bowel movement I've ever had. Rather than heading straight to the store, which I could see from the intersection, I turned right and went home. I quickly changed clothes and went to a baseball game, drank beers and ate hot dogs, and felt better than I had in months. When I got home that night, I turned the phone ringer off. I slept in the following morning, casually ate breakfast. I looked at the caller ID and saw about a half dozen calls from the store, another from other various bosses. I didn't check the messages yet. I got dressed and spent the day at the beach. A few days later, I checked the messages and it was pretty epic. The first one was one of the morning crew just saying, "Hey man, you must be running late. See you when you get here." The next was, "Hey, you coming in?" Later that morning, it was my boss saying something to the effect of how this was unprofessional or something. I deleted the rest. A few weeks later, I went into the store to pick up my last paycheck. This was prior to direct deposit. I don't think I'd even showered. The hourly guys that I'd worked were smiling pretty widely and told me that one of the company VPs was there taking care of the trail of destruction I'd left in my wake. He spots me and gets my attention. I walked into the office with him and he starts going on about, "Hey, I know things didn't work out for you here and everything, but you just up and quit this way. We had to change all the locks on the building, the delivery vehicles. At this point, I just stopped him and said, "Mike, I don't give a crap. Give me my check." He started up again and I gave him another, "I don't give a crap." And he shut up and retrieved my massively inflated goodbye paycheck. I spent the next month on a sweet road trip all over the Southwest US. Didn't have to work again for 3 months from the bonus I gave myself. Still one of the best decisions I've ever made. Story 12. I worked at a small sports retailer which had both a local brick and mortar store and an online store. I was responsible for keeping the online store functional and making changes to it. I met a girl who started working there and we started dating, but we knew to keep our relationship outside of the office. We never were talking during work hours and kept to ourselves at lunch. My boss harassed us constantly. I was promised a 3-month evaluation. This never happened. I went on vacation this January, which I had both talked to HR in person and sent them an email asking for the time off months in advance. I was told this was satisfactory. When the time came, they threw a hissy fit and demanded that I stayed. I left anyways because I wasn't going to miss getting paid a boatload to go on vacation to Chicago through another company that I had been working for 7 years seasonally for a few weekends a year. While I was gone, my girlfriend and some other office workers texted me that my boss had moved me out of my office and put me in a corner. I was infuriated. When I got back, I brought this up and they said they felt it was better for my work. I took that and just went back to work. I get moved again twice over the next 2 days. A few weeks later, I went Employee of the Week for optimizing a web server that we ran just because I saw that it wasn't running properly. And all of our web traffic was leaving because it took 20 seconds for each page to load. This is part of my job description. After this, my boss starts micromanaging me by coming into my office every few hours and asking me what I'm currently working on. Several times he came in and after talking to me for a few seconds, blew up and started yelling at me. He told me he expected more out of me, and I had no idea what he was talking about, since I was an excellent worker. The last straw was the Wednesday before Valentine's this year. I had been called into my boss's office every single day that week and had been yelled at for 3/24 of an hour that I had worked that week. I couldn't take it anymore. For some reason, I was being picked on, even though all my tasks were completed on time. After hustling to finish up all my remaining tasks for the next 2 weeks, I go in and explain to him what I did and that I was turning in my 2 weeks. My boss exploded. It was like a pot of water boiling with a lid on it. He got really red and just sat there for a few minutes. Then he just starts yelling more. He goes on a rampage, slamming doors and kicking things throughout the office while a bunch of our staff is still there. He starts going up to random people and saying, "Can you believe what me just did? He quit. He ducking quit. I can't believe it." I'm sitting here watching this, trying to hold back laughter at his immaturity. He pins all the blame on everything that's ever been wrong with the company on me. Tells me that I can't ever use him as a reference. I wasn't in a million years. Tells me I'm a waste of time. Storms out again, kicking and slamming doors and boxes. Comes back in as I'm gathering my stuff up to leave and tells me to never come back again. I don't. Sorry, 13. I was working at a golf course at the time, doing grounds work, cutting holes, mowing greens, etc. This one morning, it had poured the night before, and the entire course was soaked. We just did hole 1 and were on our way out to hole 2 when my coworker who was driving the cart noticed a bright orange thing in a puddle. We pulled up beside it and lo and behold, it's a cat. It wasn't a kitten, but not necessarily a full-grown cat either, and it was in rough shape. Soaking wet, barely breathing, a faint whimper of a meow every once in a while. This cat needed help fast or else it was surely going to die. We ended up putting this cat in a box we had with us for spare tools, lining it with an old rag from the back of the cart to try and keep it warm. We finished cutting all 9 holes around the course, and upon arrival back to the shed, the bossman, I honestly can't remember his title, if he was supervisor, etc., Came out and noticed the cat in the box. I asked if there was any place inside the shed, near heat, where we could keep him for a little while. His response? Throw it in the ducking woods. I don't want to deal with this crap. I ended up picking up this cat, Boss, watching me, and I laid it down on some grass outside the tree line. I ended up getting back on the mower and mowed a few more greens, but the thought of the cat just sitting in there just bothered me. I eventually just stopped mowing the greens, drove the mower back, didn't even wash it off, picked up the cat, still breathing but it's getting worse, and took her into my car. I luckily had stayed the night at a friend's house the night before and had a blanket in the trunk with which I wrapped her up with. I brought this cat to the veterinarian's office in the town of the place. I went inside and said, I work at the golf course in town here. We found this cat that looks like she's on her last few breaths. Is there anything you can do? The person behind the counter told me to wait a second as she walked to the back, came back about 3 minutes later and told me, I'm sorry, but we don't accept stray animals here. This ducking cat is dying and you won't help it? What the heck? I furiously drove back home to my town's veterinarian's office. I told the person the same exact thing, only this time, the person actually came out to my car and took the cat. She said her breathing was terrible, shivering, and one of the weakest meows she had ever heard. They promptly took it inside, and that was the last I had seen of it. Since this is a small town, population of 1,500 people, my mother had received an email from the vet. The cat had survived. She had severe hypothermia, and I quote, if she had not been brought in within the next half hour, she more than likely would have died. The cat ended up being the adoption of the month and was actually adopted 2 weeks after this whole fiasco occurred. Story 14. My stupid boss at a coffee shop put me over the edge. I was under 18, working 10-hour days without breaks or a lunch, but I persevered. I was too young and dumb to know that I was being used. I probably would have stayed at the job had this woman not asked me to wash out her coolers that she had brought on a camping trip and left rotting meat in. Sorry, Karen. I'll work my ass off doing my job, but I'll not do your personal, nasty errands on company time. Let me just state, I was a barista, not a personal assistant. She was not the owner of the company, merely a manager. I said I would not do it, and she yelled at me about not having the right attitude. I told her that I was not her assistant and to clean her own damn coolers, and I would close the shop at the end of the day, and she could enjoy the 4:30 a.m. opening shift the next day. For the record, she did have to open in the morning and was given a solid chewing out by the owners when I informed them of the situation. She was not fired. Story 15. Here it goes. I was a manager at a beach shop for about a year, was a regular employee for a year or so before that. My upper district management had a contract with student programs in places like Ecuador, and most of our busy season employees were foreign. I learned to embrace the students being there and actually enjoyed learning about them and hearing their stories. Very quickly, upper management's scheme started to unravel after they got enough kids sent over who knew enough English to explain to me what was really happening. The students were promised a fully furnished place to live within walking distance of where they worked and great pay. My district manager rented out a 3-bedroom apartment in a crap hole complex for about $800 a month. He stuffed 5 or 6 kids in there with some mattresses on the floor and 3 plates. I wish I was kidding. The apartment was also an hour bike ride from our store. I ended up picking them up and dropping them off every day because it was always 90 degrees out and most likely raining. He collected $450 rent every month from each of them. If they threatened to find another place to live, he fired them and sent them home. He treated these poor kids like crap. Me sticking around to defend them felt like a duty, even though I ducking hated that job. The final straw was when one of my female employees came to work completely freaked out and had been crying. I took her aside and asked her what was going on, how I could help, etc. It took some prying, but she finally told me what happened, tears running down her face in embarrassment. Apparently, district manager had stopped by their apartment before she had to work that day. He was notorious for just letting himself into their apartment without knocking or warning. She was alone and had just gotten out of the shower. He was being very pushy and yelling at her that she couldn't go get dressed because he wanted to go into the room she stayed in and check the closets for stolen merchandise, and she had to follow him. She refused, and he got even more pushy when he realized she was alone. She ended up having to run to the neighbor's house in a towel and bang on the door for help. When she got back to the apartment with her neighbor, he was gone. She was convinced that he was going to come back and beg to stay with me. Her and 3 other girls that lived there stayed at my house that night. The next day, I dropped them off and then never saw them again. One recently contacted me on Facebook and told me that they all bought plane tickets out of their own pockets and flew home. I'm glad they did. I quit after that day. I couldn't be a part of it anymore. I reported what was going on and ducking bolted. Last I heard, district manager was fired, but they still get foreign exchange students every season. Story 16. Got a few of them that both had rather dire circumstances leading up to me quitting, But my latest one was working for a tech support firm. Pay was adequate for the amount of work I actually did, barely any, and I had been with the company for 2 years with no hope of advancement because I refused to grovel at the feet of anyone. I admit I mostly stuck with it because I live in the middle of nowhere, and it was the highest paying job in the area. The problem started when our CEO, whom I later found out was effectively stashing a lot of the profit made into his own pocket and was caught, left the company, and they brought in someone who had his works in finance. He decided to save money. It was time to trim the fat. A lot of our best workers in the tier above me started to get bogus reviews, bogus scores, and were effectively bullied into quitting or getting fired because if either of those happens, they can deny you unemployment. For weeks, the T2 staff started to get slimmer and slimmer until eventually there was an extremely small handful of them. And they were our newbies who barely got paid more than me as the highest paid T1 operator. With most of them out of the way, they began to focus on the Tier 1 guys, as you might expect. Being a lot closer to the T1 guys, I started to hear the BS they were fed on their reviews, how the scoring system changed just to make us look bad, and how some people were outright fired who had no previous offenses merely because they had seniority and made a bit more money than the others. When it got to me, I stopped caring after seeing what they did to my friends. I was their top tech guy, a T1 support with knowledge even their NOC team struggled with. I aced the tests, fixed customers, and took the highest number of calls with lowest number of transfers. They started to pull me into meetings to Karen about the way I talk since they couldn't pull numbers or calls to get me in trouble. They wrote me up because of my damn accent, because I have a northern accent, twice, and told me if I didn't quit faking it, then I would be fired. I handed in my 2 weeks notice the next day and stopped taking calls for a week and just played games on my desk until I went home for the 2 weeks I had left. Amusingly enough, I used one of the supervisors as a reference, and she has nothing but glowing reviews for me because she knew of all the BS going down, but her hands were tied. Story 17. Boss was the most passive-aggressive person ever. Loved to send emails to all employees about mistakes other employees made. These emails never specified the employee, but it was a small company and not hard to figure out who it was about. Not only that, but this was the only way the employee at fault even knew they did anything wrong. He never took anyone aside to tell them if they were doing anything wrong, which happened all the time, since there was no training, and you were thrown into your job without even knowing what was expected from you. When someone royally screwed up, he'd go and talk to another supervisor about how ducked up that person was, how stupid they were, etc., loudly, so everyone could hear. Again, not to the person, just talking badly about the person to someone else. It was a toxic environment. On my last day, he sent out an email that read, "Someone is skating on thin ice and should start looking for another job now. Don't expect to last the week. Couldn't take it anymore." Went in and gave my notice. He was surprised and said, "That wasn't about you. Don't care. Couldn't take it." He let me finish up my work for the day and leave. Story 18. It was what ended up being my last day of work. I was 19 and working a summer job for a residential construction company in between my freshman and sophomore year of college. It was Friday and I was taking a half day as I had a physical rehab appointment in the afternoon to deal with a shoulder injury. He sprang a last-minute project on me and told me I had to finish it before I left. I told him there was most likely no way I was going to be able to finish that before I left, but I would give it my best shot. He disappears and a few hours later when I go to leave, the box that usually contains my paycheck on payday is empty. I call him up and ask him where it is, and inform him that I need that check to cover the copay of my physical rehab appointment. He doesn't care, and tells me he's not giving me my pay until I finish the project. I'm fuming but speechless, and I don't want to say or do anything rash as I know he is definitely in the wrong, so I simply hang up. He begins to text me. I frankly confront him about the issue, lay out all the details as concisely as I can, and try to get him to admit to withholding my paycheck from me in writing via text message. He takes the bait and admits to it and basically has a "what are you going to do about it" attitude. So I went to my physical therapy appointment, asked them if they would be nice enough to break their business policy and bill me later for the copay. And then I went to a lawyer. Luckily for me, one of the best lawyers in our small city happens to be a close friend of the family and a bit of mentor to me, unbeknownst to my boss. I explained what happened, and he was on the phone before I even showed him the text messages. He calls up my boss, but he doesn't answer. The lawyer leaves a message and identifying himself and the law firm he is partner at, and then explains that he is now acting as my legal counsel. He informs my boss that if my paycheck is not released to me by 9 a.m., open of business Monday, my lawyer will be filing motions immediately at that time against him to reclaim my pay. I get a text message less than 5 minutes later. "Your check is in the box." Duck, yeah. Lawyers. In the texts, that stuff about him telling me to do this job for weeks is complete bullcrap. but I wasn't going to squabble over a relatively minor detail in my pursuit of getting him to admit he was knowingly violating state and federal laws. Not that it would be a reasonable excuse to withhold pay anyway, as I told him in the messages. Story 19. Worked at support for a medical school for the state. We were understaffed and underpaid, but I was happy enough. Until one of my coworkers pinned me into a chair and tried to kiss me on the lips. When I pushed him away from my face, he tried to kiss my neck. He blocked my exit from the office. It was only the two of us in there at the time, and told me it was my fault for making him feel this way. I was terrified of him. Reported it to my management team, who reported it to HR. They took several weeks to complete their investigation. At the end of it, they told me that they had substantiated my claim. Their resolution? He has promised not to talk to you and to not do it again. I just stared at them and finally asked, "So, you're leaving him in my department?" And they confirmed it. But they guaranteed my safety because he promised. I explained I didn't feel safe, that when he was hired, he made the agreement to follow their workplace procedures, one of which was to not hold his coworker down in her chair and try to kiss her lips and neck. They rolled their eyes and told me that until further notice, my job duties were changing, and I would work our crappy student support counter, where I wouldn't have to roam the halls so that I could feel safer. I resigned shortly thereafter. I have a much better corporate IT job. Story 20. For one of my past jobs, I worked as a shift manager for a food service chain. The store management only consisted of the store manager, me, and another shift manager. It was a fairly simple job, and I was also going to college at the time, so the job was only part-time. Now, the company had a system where there would be one manager that opened the store and stick around for the first half of the day, and another manager would come in and cover the second half of the day until closing. Sometimes there were days where one of the managers would be sick, so the other remaining manager would have to cover the shift. We have something called a cloper, where that a manager would close the store the night before and open the store the next day. They would start at 4 p.m., close at 12 a.m., leave at 1 or 2 a.m., and then get to the store the next day at 9 a.m. and work until 4 p.m. This happened every now and then, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. Now, we had a store manager who was an absolute douche. He didn't give a crap about the store and always made sure that he was off on the weekend. It also didn't help that he hired his girlfriend to work in the same store. One weekend, the other shift manager ended up in the hospital. I was already doing a cloper, so I was exhausted. I tried to call the store manager to come in, but lo and behold, the douche would not answer his phone. After several calls and voicemails, he never even called back once. This resulted in me working 3 shifts straight on a weekend, with an exam coming up on Monday. Needless to say, I was pissed. When the store manager came back, he never even mentioned the missed calls and voicemails and went about as if nothing was wrong. Despite confronting him about it, he just shrugged and walked away. I later found out that every weekend, he apparently would go snowboarding or on cruises with his girlfriend. To top it off, all the shifts his girlfriend worked, it was when he was working and she was an absolute Karen who took advantage of the fact that her boyfriend was the store manager. After finding out all that, I was like, duck this. I wasn't going to mess up my grades for a part-time job. I gave in my 2-week notice, but then changed it to a week notice because I wanted to screw the store manager over. Without a third manager, he would be forced to work weekends until they finally hired a new manager, and I knew that the process would take a while. It was great hearing how much hell the store manager went through before he found a third manager. Story 21. Bad equipment. Expected me to drive a semi with no taillights through mountain roads at night because the load is important. More important than travelers on the road, apparently. No thanks, goodbye, and good luck. Story 22. I didn't quite get to quit, but I was working for a well-respected restaurant management company. I worked hard, met my standards, got my bonuses, my staff liked me, etc. Then I decided to grow my family. When I got pregnant, the first 5 weeks were okay, but then I ended up with the most severe morning sickness you can imagine. I was hospitalized and once home put on IV fluids with an IV line right into my stomach for super strong medication. My boss's boss called me late one Saturday night after I'd been out of work and fired me. I had been gone about 3 weeks and would have been well enough to go back in about 3 more weeks. I had a doctor's note. Before you guys tell me to lawyer up, I want to point out I did try to, but I had been with the company for just under a year, meaning I was not covered by FMLA. And they fired me for sickness and being absent. Though related to pregnancy, they didn't actually say they were firing me due to pregnancy. So the guy who fired me started calling me once or twice a month to see how I'm doing and remind me if I want to come back after I have they baby. They would love that, because I kicked ass. Well, this guy knew my husband owned his own business. A business that does the same in sales, but better profits than the restaurant I was managing for them. He also knew, because I made it common knowledge to everyone, that I didn't do the job for the paycheck, but for the awesome health insurance. So the last time the guy called to ask me what my post-baby plans were and see if I would come back. I had the pleasure to remind him that because he terminated me due to illness, I got to keep my insurance for 18 months. And I reminded him it was the only reason I worked for him, which he knew. Then, I'm the most underhanded way I told him I'd rather spend my days helping my husband run his business while spending most of my time with my new baby, instead of babysitting servers and disrespectful kitchen managers, while trying to play the office politics necessary to keep corporate happy. Then I told him he wouldn't want me working for him anyways, as he is a man who fires pregnant women, and I had lost all respect for him. And did he want someone working for him that had no respect for him as a boss or a human being? I was lucky I have the financial means to survive, but many women in my situation would not be so lucky. The Cobra health insurance alone cost me over $600 a month. Story 23. When I was a second-year apprentice car mechanic, I was hired at a certain luxury car dealer in Toronto under the pretense that I would have to work in a wash bay for a week until the guy whose spot I was filling left. He had quit a week earlier and was working his final 2 weeks. Fast forward a month, and I'm still in the wash bay. Every single car that came out of the shop came into the wash bay for a full wash. I was okay with doing the job. A paycheck is a paycheck, but it was not what I was hired for. When I inquired about it, for the third time in a month, they promised me that I would be in the shop the following week. This was on a Tuesday. I washed cars all week, 10 hours a day, and when the bay was empty, I would wash managers, salesmen, and other employees' cars. I would end up soaking wet at the end of every shift, and the basement wash bay was always stuffy and dusty. I had a permanent stuffy nose for my entire time there. I had Sunday off, and Monday morning I woke up excited to finally get a chance to work in the shop. I walk in, punch in, and ask the service manager if she has any work orders for me, and asked if I could bring my toolbox in. She looked at me, thought about it for a second, and said, "I'm not sure I can bring you up this week." I looked at her dead in the eyes, laughed, said, "You know what? I quit. Find yourself a new gopher, because I am sick and tired of being run through the ringer because I wash cars too well. I was hired as a mechanic, yet I haven't even turned a wrench. You are running this service department into the ground, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. I'll come back tomorrow with my uniform." She promptly called me ungrateful and flipped on what she had said minutes earlier. And here I was going to bring you up today. You can kiss your job goodbye. Don't drop off your uniform. Give it to insert friend/coworker's name here. If I see you on the premises again, I will call the police. 2 months later, I found out that the owners of the dealer hated her, and she was fired about 2 weeks after I left. Story 24. Big Boss's lapdog used to come in, interrupt our work for no reason, shout at us for 5 to 10 minutes about stuff we didn't control, and then leave. Every time he did, I spent the next hour looking for other work. One day, I found it. Story 25. Here's my story. When I was 19, I was working for Red Bull's mobile energy team, the ones that drive around the Mini Cooper with the big Red Bull can on top, and it was a dream job. It paid extremely well. Flexible hours, benefits, and I didn't have to drive my car other than to the office. My boss was a young guy, I think he was about 26, who didn't have any experience managing until he got this job, about 4 months prior. On New Year's Eve, my uncle passed away after a long, painful battle with brain cancer. Emotionally distraught, I called my boss and left him a message telling him that I would need to go up to Chicago for the funeral. I didn't know the details, but I thought the best thing I could do was give him a heads up so that he could schedule accordingly. He called me the next day, and when I answered the phone, he said, "So, why do you have to go out of town?" I explained again that my uncle, he just passed away, and his response was, "But I don't understand why you have to go to Chicago for this funeral." I explained to him that all of my family lived in Chicago, so that's where the funeral was to be held. He then told me that he was going to keep me off the schedule for a week when I came back into town as punishment for not giving him enough notice. The company requires 2 weeks' notice on any vacation request. I explained to him that this wasn't a vacation for me, but if that's what he felt he needed to do, go ahead, because I needed to be with my family. Fast forward to the week after I came home, and I had been off the schedule for 6 days. My boss sent out our schedule emails, and I noticed that I was off the schedule for yet another week. I called him because I thought he had made an error, and he said that he didn't feel that a week was just enough punishment for leaving town without 2 weeks' notice. My jaw dropped, and I was speechless for almost a solid minute. When I finally found my voice, all I could say was, "You know what, George? You can go duck yourself in this ducking job." Story 26, another good one. I was working at a custom wheel and tire shop for minimum wage. I got sick of it because I was making $6 an hour, and I knew they were charging customers over $60 per hour for labor. I quit that job to work at Discount Tire. When I interviewed, I was very explicit that I would not leave my current job unless I was needed full-time, 40+ hours per week, and that I had the relevant experience to start full-time my first week. So I go take the substances test, wait for the results so that I can formally put in my resignation. I called the lab, and they had my results 24 hours after taking the test, but the manager had failed to retrieve my results 48 hours after the test. Finally, after 3 days of calling the manager 3 times a day, he got my substances test back and officially offered me the job. We agreed on a start date, and that was that. I put in my 2 weeks at the current job, called up the manager at Discount Tire a few days before I was to start there just to see how things were going at the store. Now he tells me to call him on my start date, and he will tell me when to come in. My start date comes, and I call, can you come in at 3? No problem, I say. So I show up at 3, figuring since it was Monday, it was slow in the morning, and he just needed me there for the evening rush. At the end of the day, I asked the manager what my schedule was going to be. He kind of hesitates and says that I should call him again in the morning, and he will let me know. This really upset me as I was told I was to be put in the regular schedule immediately. I ended up working 13 hours that week and earned $90 after taxes. After paying for gas to get to work that week, I ended up making about $45. I immediately quit and started to look for other work, and ended up selling cars for 6 months. Story 27. I was working a simple summer job for a banner printing company in my hometown. It was the summer going into my junior year of college, so I didn't really care for the job. But I worked hard and built a pretty good relationship with my bosses. Well, the final job I had was to clean these used printing machines we had bought inside and out. Well, the machines were enormous and completely filthy. The regional manager had come in earlier in the week and was just a complete muffin. I worked with 2 girls, about my age, and both fairly attractive, and he loved them and let them do anything, but he was up my ass all the time. I got pretty sick of it. These machines take about 25 to 35 hours to clean completely, and I was honestly using toothbrushes to clean certain areas. But like I mentioned, it was work, and I was getting paid, so I didn't really care. I honestly enjoyed this more than previous tasks because I always had something to do. Well, I had put my 2 weeks in because school was about to start up, but I wanted to stay and finish the job. There were 9 of these printers total, and I had cleaned about 5 of them by myself. And the 2 girls had cleaned 2 together and were working on their 3rd. I mean, they were twigs and girly girls working a really blue-collar, physically difficult job, so I didn't really mind. Well, the job was 9 to 5, and one day I showed up at 9:07 to start working on the last printer. I got screamed at for about 15 minutes by the regional manager for being late, and blah blah. So when I took a 32-minute lunch break instead of a 30-minute lunch break, the line at Subway was longer than usual, he flipped crap. This dude had the balls to scream at me and say I was worthless, while I was lying on my back cleaning paint that had been caked on this huge-ass machine with a toothbrush. So I got up, promptly told him to go duck himself and clean his own machine. Went to school the next day a week early and got moved in and sufficiently drunk all week. I really enjoyed it. Story 28. Working at Taco Bell at 17. It was New Year's Eve and my family was having a party. I was working because I needed the money. Missing the party was no big deal. I'm in the lobby sweeping the floor and some of my friends were there eating. As I'm sweeping, a few of my friends are in the lobby eating and are the only people there. So I'm having a conversation with them as I'm doing my job. Shift manager comes out of the office, where she'd been on a personal phone call for 20 minutes, and tells me to stop talking and start cleaning. My friends tried to vouch for me by telling her that when I was doing my job, I just happened to be talking to them while doing it. She told the customers that she didn't care and that I needed to be working. There were only 4 people scheduled to work that night. I quit right then and told the Karen, enjoy the bar closing rush on Nye with 2 employees. Then I went home to party with the family. Story 29. I worked as a goods-in clerk at a warehouse. The job pretty much sucked, but the people were worse. There were bad attitudes, standoffishness, bitterness, brutally strict bosses, even embarrassment from some people about being there. The toilet had piss on the floor, snot on the walls, a really scummy dive. Anyway, after being employed for several months on discounted salary because I was still a trainee, even though I had picked the job up in about a week, one day at work's end, the shift ended and people started to leave, so the new shift could log into their PCS. A guy called Chris and I remained seated, just in case a job came in literally at the last minute, because we knew that if we left early, even a minute early, even if the people replacing us wanted to leave, so they could log in rather than just stand around, the workplace wasn't above punishing people for it. So like total lemons, we sat there at the end of our shift until bang on 5 p.m., then we left. I swear, we were the last 2 from our shift to leave the office. And even if we'd left with everybody else, literally no one would have cared. Our relief were standing there awkwardly, just wanting us to leave a little early so that they could sit down and sign in. Anyway, next morning, Fat Pat the supervisor comes storming into the office and announces that everyone needs to go into the meeting room for a blocking about everyone leaving early the day before. Bemused, Chris and I speak up and say, Pat, I presume this doesn't apply to us? We were here till the bitter end yesterday. And I crap you not. Fat Pat's reply was, no, Magic Spa. You and Chris get in that room as well. Yes, you didn't leave early, but a passing manager saw you both not sitting upright in your seats and thought it looked really unprofessional. He was being serious. Well, I didn't go into any damned meeting room for any dressing down. Instead, I laughed out loud. announced that I was quitting, and started to prepare a letter of resignation that very minute. I left at the end of the week, but I was washing that job off me for months. Story 30. After I got laid off from a job I loved, I went back to school and took a good-paying help desk position. As soon as I started, I realized I would be considered a temp. No sick days/vacation and no benefits. Figured, oh well, the pay is good. The final straw was when the manager came in during slow time of no calls to ask what everyone was doing. Everyone else was on YouTube and watching movies. I said I was doing my homework for school. A few minutes later, got called in and written up. The manager said that she didn't want me doing homework because if you get a better education, I'm afraid you'll leave to a better job. I know I can't give you a career, but I don't want you to leave this position. Story 31. I was working at Cost Plus World Market, had been for a year. I was the senior on the stock crew. Everyone else had quit or was new hires. I was getting paid less than everyone else, had to do more work, and I was the one that got yelled at when everyone else didn't finish their work. I had no real authority over anyone, so I couldn't tell them to keep working. And if I said anything to the store manager about people slacking off, it was shrugged off. My hours were getting slashed, and I was down to 5 a week. I injured myself severely and tried to call into work, but no one would answer the phone, and there was no answering machine. I was written up as a no-show, no-call, and they fired me without telling me. I came in to work my shifts despite being in a lot of pain, and no one told me they'd fired me until a week later when the store manager ran into me. They legally couldn't fire me because I'd clocked in after being fired, so the manager cut my hours down to 3 a week. After an investigation to determine if I was at fault for the no-call, no-show, they determined that it was not my fault, but my hours never went up. I came in one day at 4 a.m. to stock. I had finals that day that I'd have to deal with, and it was already starting out crafty because we had twice the work of normal to do. I was also in pain. I had to clean out the coffee pot so people would have coffee to drink in the morning, and I found mold. It broke the straw. I grabbed my jacket, put it on, hung out in the break room for a half hour eating the bagels left over from the night before. Bag had broke open on the shelf. Relaxed my ass off for a while. Took a nap, then told my manager when he got in that I quit and walked out the door. Got a job at Target 2 days later that paid higher, gave me plenty of hours, and had easier work. I'll never buy anything from Cost Plus World Market again. Story 32. Job quitting 1. My manager at my first job was 22, a huge Karen, and ran the place like a middle school playground. She hired her friends and had no respect for anyone else. After being abused by a drunken ex-boyfriend and finally escaping and getting home at 5 a.m. on Christmas morning, I called in sick to work on Christmas Day. When I next returned to work, I was summoned down by a boss and her new boss, while she blatantly lied about me skipping work, spreading rumors, and planning the whole thing to avoid working on Christmas. She was clearly not being allowed to fire me and was unhappy about that, so she strongly encouraged me to quit. I left my letter of resignation on her desk the morning of a large holiday event that I was scheduled to work. Job quitting 2. I was sick of working alone in a poorly managed restaurant when my coworkers found every excuse not to show up. Half the time, one of the cooks wouldn't show up either, and the manager made himself pretty scarce too. I made crap tips because it was a crappy restaurant in a neighborhood full of black people and college students, not notorious for being good tippers, so I made an average of about $5 per hour. They were legally required to compensate me for that, but didn't. The straw that broke the camel's back was when, on the week of Halloween, I didn't have a single shift that was actually within my availability. The girl in charge of scheduling was 20 and wanted to go out on Halloween, so she scheduled me to work. Halloween was on a Wednesday and I had class. Her response? Well, I scheduled you, so you have to either work those shifts or get someone to cover for you. Too bad. If you wanted it off, you should have requested it. I replied that I had assumed that telling her I was unavailable on those days when I was hired meant I didn't need to go request every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the rest of the year off, and I quit. I believe they hired someone new and made her work alone on Halloween. Story 33. I used to work at Next, UK clothing store. I got hired around the Christmas period but was on a permanent contract, not just for Christmas. I applied for menswear but was always put in the stockroom, which I kid you not, was the size of a football field. It was ginormous. The store itself wasn't even that big, but the storeroom was unimaginably large. So I spent 8 hours a day, 3 or 4 days a week climbing ladders, tagging clothes, putting those little cubes on hangers, carrying piles of clothes back and forth between the stockroom, no elevator directly there, and to the shop. On top of that, the supervisor of the stockroom was a massive Karen who made the job more hellish than it already was. Always moaning I wasn't doing anything when I was, barking orders with no please or thank you, and just generally being a Karen. She would work at the speed of light, which is all well and good for her, but the average human just doesn't give a crap about their job. And the only reason she worked so hard was because she wanted to be promoted. I didn't give a crap. I was a peon underling, and that was fine by me. Anyway, company policy dictated that everyone had to work sale days. Nobody could take a day off at all. And sale day started Boxing Day, as anyone from the UK will know, as people go ducking nuts for the next sale. I was living and working in Bristol, but my family lived 100 miles away, and I wanted to go home and spend the day with my family and not have to leave the celebrations early and miss out on all the food and drinks just for some crafty job I ducking hated. So I just didn't turn up. I didn't call up and quit or anything. A couple days later, the woman who did payroll and stuff gave me a call to ask where I was and what happened. I explained I was never coming back and asked her if she could kindly inform Donna, the Karen supervisor, that she was a massive... I don't know if she did inform her. I hope she did. I'll never know. Story 34. I used to work at a high-yield celebrity chef's restaurant and was having a stressful day. The computers were down, food wasn't coming out on time, kitchen staff was being lazy, and the bussers were busy. The perfect storm of restaurant bullcrap. Now, this restaurant is the main reason a lot of people come to the city I live. They stand in line for hours on end, in the heat just to eat off of a crappy buffet. And if they couldn't get in, they'd cry and scream. So the types of customers we'd get were less than friendly most of the time. Anyways, I'm stressed because people have been yelling at me all day over stuff I couldn't control. So I went over to the floor manager and asked them to slow down. The amount of people were sat in my section for a bit while I collected myself. My section emptied out after 30 minutes. After a while, this group of 3 was sat in my section. I went over, gave them my spiel, and got their drink orders. I came back, gave them their drinks, and got their orders. 3 orders of chicken fingers off of the kids' menu. These are grown-ass adults who have spent hundreds of dollars to eat lunch at a place many people have been turned away from, and they all ordered child-sized chicken fingers. These chicken fingers are about 2 inches long and come 2 to a plate. They're served on a bed of lettuce and come with 3 deep-fried potato slices. They are made out of complete bullcrap and take forever to cook. A little later, their food comes out, and of course they look less than impressed. About 6 minutes later, I come by to see how everything is, and this is what one of the customers says to me. Well, after hearing about how amazing this place is and how great the food is, I gotta say that I'm pretty disappointed. After they say this, they place a single piece of wilted lettuce the size of a dime into my hand. I didn't bother showing up the next day. Story 35. At one job that I loved, my boss decided that he could just feel on my boobs and I just wouldn't notice it. I filed a complaint, and that was the end of that. I quit the next day. Story 36. I was left alone with 30 kids, and one of them had an asthma attack and I could find nobody to help me. Empty office, vanished coworker. I thought it was unsafe, I was well underpaid, and I wanted nothing to do with it. Quit that night. Story 37. I was a program director, group homes. I was constantly told to watch out / be careful, etc. because certain clients could ruin my career, could go to jail. False reporter. The previous director had been fired for that reason. I was scared of screwing up constantly and always doubted myself. I was always on call even though there were supposed to be rotating people for that. Generally speaking, the company had / has a pretty bad reputation. They treated staff terrible, but in all fairness, they are absolutely wonderful with the clients. Also, no real benefits. The last straw. We were required to get massive staff training done before the end of December. No problem. I held on to all my training so I could turn it in all at once. Halfway through December, the owner freaked out that everyone hadn't had their training turned by that point and basically shut down the entire company to have all employees train all of the staff over the phone. She told everyone in the office that if we did not get it done by the end of the week, that no one was going to have Christmas Day off. Everyone got their crap done. My problem was that if she wanted it done before Christmas, tell us to do it before Christmas when you first give us the task. Don't tell us before January 1st and freak out when it's not done weeks before then. While this was going on, I was also told that I'd need to work in one of the group homes over Christmas because they didn't want to pay any more overtime. I was salaried. It all just sucked. I'm making half the pay I did then. But I am happy, really happy. For the first time in ages, Story 38 worked at an incredibly small gyro place. I was one of 3 employees, as my second job. I gave the owner my schedule every week and said she could put me on for any day that I wasn't at my first job. Pretty easy, right? It's not hard to schedule 3 employees, 2 of which don't have any other obligations, right? Well, she would constantly change the schedule without notifying me. She would put me on for days. I had explicitly said I was not available to work. I'd get these angry calls and voicemails from my boss and coworkers asking me why I wasn't at work when I was on the schedule. I kept trying to ask my boss if I needed to do something differently so this wouldn't happen, but she said it was okay to continue leaving notes for her with my available days. Version 1 of the schedule would be okay, and then a few days later, she would change it for no apparent reason. Finally, she left this nasty gram on my phone that said, "I'm getting tired of this no call / no show business, Vandal. If you still want this job, give me a call back and we'll talk about it." So I called her back and left a message saying that I was sick of her changing the schedule and that I quit. Felt so good. Story 39. I don't know if I could say I quit or gave up. I worked at a sporting goods store that played favorites hardcore. All of the employees would either bring a book or a laptop and zone out for hours at a time. That's how slow it was. The final straw that made me quit trying was getting my hours cut because of a rumor. I had to confront my own boss before they would tell me why they cut my hours. I had asked a customer if they needed help and they said no. A few minutes later, the same customer asked one of the owners for help, and he assumed that we had ignored the customer. They cut my hours specifically, even though 3 of us were on the floor at the time, and I went to the trouble to greet the person. After that, I realized that they weren't actually paying attention to whatever effort I was putting out. It also didn't help that there was no manager in the store for any shift I ever worked. We were given tasks that took half an hour and had 7.5 hours to burn. In the end, they fired me for having my back to the store, even though I was 2 feet from an employee that had her nose deep in a novel. They made her a manager. The theft that occurred, which they used as justification, didn't even happen while I was at work. They seemed to conveniently ignore that I would turn around and then watch the store anytime a customer was actually in the store. I wasn't even fired by a manager. I was fired by my boss's wife, who wasn't even supposed to be working at that branch anymore. It's been a year and everyone I knew has either quit or been fired. The girl they made into a manager wants to find a new job desperately. The business is struggling, which doesn't bother me. Those mother duckers were shady when dealing with customers as well. Story 40. I left UPS just short of 3 months when I was told I'd have to give up $15 per week out of my $60 per week paycheck to pay the 3-month of back Teamster union dues. When I asked why I was paying back union dues when I wasn't protected by the union in that time, the Teamster rep told me, basically, that's just how it's done. I walked out mid-shift. To this day, the only job I've walked out of. Still hate unions to this day. Story 41. A few years ago, I ran record during the night shift. Right before I went on shift, it started raining bad. The news had said it would flood everywhere. We had our pre-shift meeting and it was emphasized that everyone would be going out no matter what. I was a noob at the time and didn't really feel comfortable essentially towing in a hurricane, especially since I would be responsible for any damages to towed vehicles. Boss said he didn't care and that there was tons of money to be made towing in a storm. I agreed that there was plenty of money to be gained for them and plenty of money to be lost for me. They told me if I didn't drive, I was fired. I drove into my section and decided I was going to just duck off for 12 hours unless it cleared up and I felt like I could move something. Think I ended up getting maybe 1. At the end of the night, it took me some 2 hours to navigate through all the water and such back to my side of town, only for me to get stuck where the water got too high. Searched around, but the yard was in the middle of a depression and there was no getting through the water. Locked my truck down, parked it in a U-Haul parking lot, confirmed with the U-Haul manager that I could leave the truck there for the day, then hiked through the waist-deep water to leave my keys in the box at the yard. Told my boss that the truck wasn't moving for the day, but if the water was down by night, I'd hike to it to start my shift. I quit when he demanded that I swim back to it and stand guard for the remainder of the day until the start of my night shift in 12 hours. Story 42. I worked at a car dealership in 2007 after graduating from an expensive top 20 university. Sorry, Mom and Dad. It was the only work I could find at the time, and it was straight commission. But being female and attractive, I was unsurprisingly, successful at it. I was on track to gross about $60,000 my first year. My secret was building relationships with past customers, getting referrals, and really working the internet requests. The dealership changed ownership about 3/4 of the way through my tenure there, and the new management sucked. The old management was shady, but the new management really, truly sucked. I constantly got picked on because I was the only female sales rep, and there was one female manager who hated my guts. Anyway, final straw was one day during the week, read, very slow, almost no lot traffic and hot outside. The new GM decreed that we had to have at least 3 salesmen on point, standing outside on the lot. I told my boss that I had internet leads to work and I'd be at my desk, and he said fine. Apparently only 2 other reps went out, and the GM saw me sitting at my desk and flipped the duck out at me for being lazy, insubordinate, disrespectful, spoiled, etc. Every single person in the dealership, salesmen, managers, customers, turned to stare at me. I stood up, told him very quietly that I had a college education, a brain, and more potential in my little finger than he had in his whole body, and that I quit. My ducking boss, who had okayed me working at my desk, never said a word. I now take great delight in going to car dealerships with friends and helping them buy cars, because I know all the inside secrets to getting the best price. Story 43. Worked for a subcontractor for a government contract. Pay was okay, but 45-minute drive to work, a mess at the pass office every day, 20-minute walk to the actual workplace, 2 months of useless training, no consideration for issues agreed to beforehand, expected unannounced overtime or furlough, depending on the workload. And I have 2 kids, much younger at the time, that depended on me being home at a fairly specific time. But the last straw was 2 weeks after being on the work floor. I was volume told that I would be working the weekend and that it was expected, though never explained beforehand, that we could be volunteered in this manner whenever management decided it was necessary. Quit that day at the end of my shift. Story 44. There wasn't just one straw. There was a general swing towards cost-cutting measures that made it too unpleasant to work there. Parking fees, coin-operated water coolers, maintenance, that is, janitorial levies, equipment hire fees, etc. The photocopiers were coin-operated, and fees were charged for every amenity it was legally possible to do so for climate control, for example. For a while, it was almost funny, like the Ryanair of offices, but at some point, I found myself sitting on the most uncomfortable chair I've ever used, trying to write with stationery that was chained to my desk, thinking, I just can't take this anymore. And that's my story. Story 45. When I was 19, I worked at the local McDonald's while my husband was in basic. I requested 7 days off so I could drive from Florida to South Carolina to see him graduate. 8 days before that, I was working a new position that I was never trained on. I wasn't going fast enough, so the manager on duty made a rude-ass comment about how I needed to be more like the girl that had been working this position for over 5 years. I explained that I was never trained in this position, and the manager continued belittling me. I walked out and told her that it was complete ducking bullcrap. I was suspended for an additional 7 days, which was fine with me. I came back after spending time with my husband, who looked over our budget and told me that I didn't need the job and I could stay home and be a mom to our then 2-year-old daughter. So I turned in my 2 weeks notice. I was halfway through my 2 weeks and a coworker got wind of me quitting. She asked me why, and I explained that my husband wanted me to stay home and raise our daughter. She started to harass me for being unfair and making my husband be the only one to work. I complained to a manager who immediately got onto the coworker. Second manager comes in and asks why I'm quiet. I explained to her what happened. She took me outside and got onto me for it. Then she told me I couldn't abandon my job. I walked inside, clocked out, removed my hat and my shirt, said, "Duck you," to the second manager, apologized to the first, and walked out. This all happened in the middle of a big lunch rush. Story 46. I'm a nanny, and I was hired by a woman with 2 boys, 4 and 5 years old. I was working from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day. I woke the boys up and did everything for the day and got them into bed, and she would come in and say goodnight and tuck them in. She also had me doing all the housework. In the job description, it said some light housework. I did everyone's laundry, scrubbed toilets, and mopped. The main issue I had with her was that she didn't do crap, and if she felt something I did wasn't up to par, she would leave me a note on the kitchen counter. The things she had problems with were that she thought strawberries should only be fed to the kids in the morning. I sent GS in the older boy's lunchbox, and she informed me that he didn't like them, he ate all of them. She had me go to the library once a week to get books for the kids, but I wasn't allowed to read them to them because that's her thing. On Fridays, she would have me pack her kids' lunch for the following Monday. I didn't work Saturday or Sunday, so she didn't have to do anything on the weekend. She once got upset with me for feeding her sons all the berries that I had washed and cut up. There were plenty in the fridge, but hadn't been prepared by me because she needed them for her breakfast the following morning. So I finally quit and said I think she should hire a housekeeper instead of a nanny because with all the other work I had to do, I barely had time to speak with her kids. I was also getting paid like $450 per week before taxes. Karen was crazy. Story 47. The number one reason I quit jobs is I get responsibility heaped on me, but no authority to act on it. That, and if you screw with my pay, I've never gone without pay, but I have had it cut a couple times and quit soon afterwards. What was the final straw for you in work? Story 1. I worked in a food hall. I was there from when the place opened. The first month and a half was crazy busy. I was doing over 20,000 steps on a 5-hour shift. It started to calm down a bit, but it was still busy. A couple of months later, and all the other floor staff who started at the same time had quit from the stress. I'd proved time after time I was capable of floor management. I had good reviews from customers. I had repeat customers buying me food and giving tips. I got on with all the catering companies. Then they got a floor manager in from out of nowhere. He didn't like me from the start, and I have no idea why. Probably because he knew I was liked by the caterers or that I wouldn't sleep with him. He was a sleaze, married but flirting with all the females. He said that there was going to be a management meeting at the weekend, and it would be decided who would be supervisor/assistant floor manager. Everyone said I had it in the bag. One of the main catering managers even said that I should have his job, and there was no need for him in the first place. He gave the position to another girl who had been there less than 2 weeks. Nobody seemed happy about it. She sent me a message saying she was shocked it wasn't me. She didn't feel like she deserved it, but she took it for the extra money. Then he said he had took on another supervisor, so all shifts were covered. People started asking why I didn't get that role. He said he wasn't impressed with how I worked and he didn't understand why they liked me. Then my hours started to get cut. I'd gone from 25 to 6 in 3 weeks. By this time, my anxiety had kicked in badly. I've got bills to pay, so I'd gone to see my GP and got meds so I could sleep. I told someone in management above him what was happening, but they didn't seem to give a crap. A caterer even decided to drop his slot and go mobile, blaming him for it. Then I had a week with no hours on rota at all. That Friday, I went in because I'd left a jacket in the staff room. Whilst I was there, one of the girls was asking me to cover her next shift. She'd booked a holiday for her cousin's wedding and still been rotas on. Obviously, I said I'd cover it. The floor manager refused to let me cover it. He told me to go home and that I wasn't needed that week. That's when I knew for sure it was time to go. I said goodbye to the other floor staff and the caterers, one of whom gave me half a chicken, rice, and fries to take home, and I walked. I loved that job till he started working there. None of the catering teams I worked with are still there. None of the floor staff seem to pass their probation period, and they are constantly hiring. Story 2. My last straw was GS and shortbread. I was doing some freelance work for this event. I was only getting paid the equivalent of 4 days for about 4 months of work, so I set boundaries accordingly, which were immediately ignored. I had an in-person meeting with the boss I was reporting to on Tuesday, and we agreed to a few tasks I would get done and keep her updated on. On Thursday, she emailed me to say that, as she hadn't heard from me, she had given my job to one of her friends. At this point, the event was less than 2 weeks away. I had been working on it for 3.5 months. I'd called in every favor I had to get speakers for the events, attendees to boost our numbers, and volunteers to help me out. On the day of the event, I still turned up, did my job on what was an apparently unpaid basis, and made sure that everyone left happy. My tasks for the day also included bringing her friend, who she had given my job to, up to speed, as the friend knew nothing about what we were meant to be doing, and filling in for the 3 volunteers who had bailed on us, which the boss knew and didn't tell me until morning of. I was running 2 event spaces and a shop for hundreds of attendees, with the support of the friend who didn't know what she was doing, and one volunteer who, 2 hours into the 8-hour day, said she came to watch the talks and asked me not to call her unless I really needed her. Events still went off without a hitch, because I was doing the work of 3 people. Boss approaches me after the event, apologies for the earlier issues, and thanks and congratulates me for a job well done, then asks me to do it again next year. I have no intention of working with this woman again, but say I'll think about it. Then, a week after the event, I get an email from the boss saying I was very unprofessional on the day, and it reflected poorly on both myself and the event. What did I do, you ask? We had a green room for the speakers, where we had left tea, coffee, biscuits, fruit, etc. I left these items in the packets rather than spreading them out on plates. I have already begun speaking with every speaker and attendee who turned up on the day, just to tell them how the boss spoke to me. They have all said they will never work with her again. My initial plan was to just walk away and leave her to it. Now I'm burning all of her bridges over GS and shortbread. Story 3. 29th of March. I forgot to come out of an order for it to be invoiced. The deadline was 4 p.m. and we had a volunteer tree planting day. I knew I'd be back by 3 p.m. for that 30-second job. My line manager called me in the middle of briefing to order me back, then called the apprentice 5 minutes later to force him to bring me back at lunchtime, as he was the driver. I was fuming. Apparently, she had done it to teach me a lesson. She herself was lazy. I held our team together. Anyway, I'd said for years I was leaving, and I made a bet with the lads I'd be gone within a year. I sent out a Teams invite for the day of payment and my bank details, and true to word, I was gone. It acted as a target for me to go. Apart from those numerous other straws, I did mine 25% and her job 35% of revenue, but received about 2 pounds more than new. The rest was shared by 5 people. Found out a colleague got an overnight pay rise without arguing from simply having a moan. He was 24 on 34,000 pounds. Fair enough, but I was 33 in a shared house and needed money too. Found out the temp who I trained and managed day to day because my line manager got the same hourly. She'd been there 6 months and was close to retirement. I'd been there 5 years. Her job wasn't even vital. I could run all 3 roles of our team for months alone, but they both struggled with more than their own. Plus, the line manager was lazy with admin realization that my low wage meant I was living in a shared house with dodgy characters. The stability of being unbackable became outweighed by my wish to not live around violent people. Recruiter rang constantly desperate to take me on for 60% pay rise management, moving on to a 3rd company car while I was there. Meanwhile, nothing was done for my progress at all, even though I was taking on more and more and training people outside my team. Weird and jealous comments from management about why I needed so much money as I was doing 2 PT jobs. It was obvious from my salary and living condition. On top of that, I was 33 and estranged from family and had a very cheap car. Story 4. In a previous job, I was an operator, basically a shop floor worker getting things done with the rest of the team. I was also the key op. So when our supervisor was on holiday, I would step up a little and make sure everyone knew what they were doing, as well as going to some of the daily meetings. The company sacked my supervisor for various reasons, and I was left to run the shift. I'd done this for the best part of 6 months, and at no point did the company put out a job advert for the supervisor role, which I was waiting for so that I could apply. An operator from another department came to see me one day, asking what it was like to work night shifts. We were on a triple shift rotation, earlies, afternoons, nights. He only done earlies and afternoons. While chatting about night shifts, I asked him why. Was he thinking of transferring to our department? He replied that he was my new supervisor. Needless to say, I was pissed by this. Went to a shift manager, ranted at them about not advertising the job, and that I'd been doing it for the last 6 months, etc., etc. All they said was that this other guy had gone to them, asked if he could be the new supervisor, and they said yes. I handed my notice in there and then, story 5. I can't put a finger on any single thing triggering it, but it's much like you say. You get slightly pissed off over a number of things, and then something trivial happens that takes you over the edge, and everything rolls from there. Story 6. A bunch of little things, but the actual final straw was when I lost a baby. Individual colleagues I spoke to in confidence were wonderful, even including my boss, who had a reputation for being an unforgiving Karen. But HR was awful about it, refusing my sick pay because the sick note wasn't detailed enough. It said I'd been admitted to the gynae ward FS. I tidied up my CV while I lay on the sofa crying my eyes out. Returned to work in May, resigned in June, left in July. Story 7. It took a lot of building up, but me and my colleague ran our department between us for about 3 to 4 years prior. Instead of promoting within, the senior management team decided to create a made-up job role and set on an external candidate who we had to train up to be our manager. He was a bully, control freak, and an absolute job's worth. I put up with him for 2 years, and then last spring, I was on paternity leave for 3 weeks, came back, and he hadn't kept on top of one thing of mine. I was under so much pressure to catch up on 3/4 weeks worth of submissions whilst he was also on at me for not catching up, whilst also pulling me away from catching up to do other pointless jobs for him. It came to an abrupt end when he made a major financial cock-up and pinned the blame straight on me. It ruined my reputation, my relationship with other colleagues, and my relationship with the senior management team. I tried to smooth things out with him, but he was adamant it was all my fault, and he raised the one comment that still sticks with me, which was, "I don't even know what you do during the day," to which I responded in my head, "You're soon going to find out." I phoned a friend of mine who owned his own business and asked if I was to put my notice in that week, if he'd have work for me in 4 weeks' time, to which he said yeah. My notice went in, and it was such a funny 4 weeks watching my manager struggling to learn how to do my job. I'd been there 6 years in total, ended up going self-employed, and was the best move I ever made. He was fired 3 months later when they realized how incompetent he was. Story 8. I worked at a tiny hairdresser's when I was fresh out of school. The clients were lovely, as was the boss, but this other woman was a complete nasty piece of work. She was highly unpleasant, and especially Karini to me. I suffered her rages and snide looks and making me feel like crepe sir a solid year. Anyway, my friend and I booked a holiday. I worked my socks off to pay for this holiday. Overtime, college on Mondays, 4 nights and Sunday afternoon in a pub for extra holiday money. Went away, had a great time, and unfortunately had to come home and back to that nasty Karini woman. Gets into work in my first day back, and Karini woman says, "Where were you yesterday?" I'm confused, so I asked her, "What do you mean?" "Well, Andrea got to work yesterday. She worked in the same area." "Why didn't you?" "We didn't get home till 5 in the morning." Then she shouts at me, "You should have been in work." I went upstairs, got hers and my boss's gifts, my bag and jacket, came down and threw her gift at her, and told her to shove the job up her rise, apologized to the boss, and left. I slammed that salon door so hard the entire front window shook. I was free, stomped home and felt elated. Bumped into that unpleasant woman recently with her kids. "Oh, hi, how are you? It's been years?" I looked at her in astonishment and said, "Why are you being nice to me now? It's a shame you couldn't have been this way 20 years ago." Her mouth hung open like a bog door in a gale. Story 9. This one's easy. I'd been looking for a new job for a while. Finally got a decent offer. 10% pay rise, and their pension scheme was really good. They'd match my contributions 1-to-1. So, for instance, I put in 6%. They put in 6%. I'd been there a week, and we finally had the HR induction. They discussed the pension scheme, and I'd been told complete tosh. They'd contribute the legal minimum. Gee, thanks. Obviously, I questioned this, pointing out that I'd taken the job on the understanding it was quite different. Raised it with every manager I could find, raised it with the recruitment agent, but the answer to all was the same. That's the policy, take it or leave it. They were astonished when I left it about a month later. Sure, it's only a couple of percent, but that's not the point. It's the principle of the thing. They'd balked up, and they weren't prepared to make even a token effort to make it right. What happens the next time they balls up? Story 10. It had been brewing for a while, but the final straw was the day the head teacher told me that taking a day off to look after my ill son was unacceptable. Son was 8. My husband was in India on a work trip, and both my parents and in-laws lived 40 miles away. I literally had no other option. Then she brought up my sick time. I was having a hellish time with migraines at the time, and I'd made sure to mention the migraines at my interview. I was done. I was a school receptionist. I worked overtime every day. I took work home at weekends to make sure I was doing the best job I possibly could. I organized the PTA. I gave up my spare time to help at school discos and summer fairs. I was classed as part-time, but there wasn't a day I didn't do extra. Not one. And I was being blocked for putting my child and my health first. Duck that for a game of soldiers. I handed in my notice the next day. I loved that job. I had amazing friends there, but I just hit my limit. Karen retired a year later. She was a great head teacher. She worked wonders at that school, but she was an awful person. Terrible manager. She had 0 people skills. Story 11. That would boil my piss, to be fair. What a bunch of S. For me, it was a bit complicated, but it took the death of my daughter, and then shortly after my best friend, causing my attendance to fall off a cliff. Who'd think it? Even though I worked my ass off when I got back to it because of my attendance, noted as poor behavior in attendance with no context as to why I was off for months that year, I was instantly put in the bottom 10% for my performance review, which meant no pay rise at all. I worked in the civil service, where you were pooled against equivalent role function of 50 people. Before that even, because of my attendance and a functional change in management, my old line manager, who was happy for me to recover in my own time, was replaced by someone who immediately put me onto disciplinary stage 1 for my absences before he was even my functional development manager, not my line manager still. After my friend died, I went off sick again, signed off. When I got back from that, he then triggered stage 2. I got the union involved, who got the whole lot wiped. But yeah, then the performance review came around, and as soon as my FDM let out the words, "This may come as no surprise," my mind blanked before saying to myself, "Duck this crap." Got headhunted and never looked back. Oh, and in the performance review panel, a group of seniors who don't know a thing about you, I was represented by my FDM who didn't tell them why I was off, despite having the opportunity to do so. When I handed my notice to him, he seemed genuinely surprised that I was off. Story 12. When I worked in hospitality, I wanted to leave to pursue a different line of work anyway. But I had a final straw that changed the situation from me wanting to leave to actually feeling like I needed to. I was doing a closing shift with another manager on duty since it was a busy Friday night. I didn't know this at the time because I was in the office doing all the admin work once service was over, but she basically sat doing nothing for an hour before eventually deciding to actually pitch in to help the team close down. I didn't end up staying until the end of the close because I needed to be back in relatively early the next day, but all seemed fine before I left. Next day, I find out the team got out really late and actually made complaints about her doing nothing, because after I left, she sat at the computer pretending to do the admin work I'd already finished. She got pulled up on it by a senior manager, to which she lied and claimed to have done half of the workload with me. This was obviously infuriating, but the icing on the cake was the senior manager being too cowardly to properly reprimand her for it, despite him complaining to me about how lazy she was. Why stay somewhere where your boss acknowledges to you that your coworker does nothing? They claim credit for your work, which the boss admits he knows isn't true, and then this person faces no consequences? Story 13. About 10 years or so ago, I was paid to a really crepe CEO. He made no secret about the fact that he had a very few obvious favorites. And I'm not saying I wanted to be a favorite, but at least be treated like his actual paw. I was on the planning committee for our fairly big industry event and had been involved in at least 3 before my last. One of the other planning committee members had mentioned to him that she doesn't like getting the big thank you, flowers, etc. up on stage at the end of the night. So on the night of my last event, he made some comment in his speech about not being able to do a shout out to the planning committee, but then directly thanked only her by name. After all the hard work the whole committee had put in over the last 4 or 5 months, and me taking the lead on the whole thing, she liked to come in at the last minute and wave a clipboard around looking important. I quietly sank my vodka tonic, and a few more since it was an open bar, and started working on my CV a few days later. It took a lot of interviews to eventually get a new job, and between the event and putting in my resignation, I put in the absolute bare minimum required to keep my job. My boss didn't even bother to write in my leaving card or show up to my leaving drinks. Story 14. I'm 48 and a career project manager in corporate companies. A few jobs ago was the first time I've mentally checked out of a job. As a PM, I have responsibility for others' delivery, but no actual authority over the people doing the work. Because of that, I occasionally need to escalate issues to the execs I'm delivering projects for. One project had an exec who was a bully. He had a lot of hangups and insecurities, which he acted out by trying to bully people. During a meeting, I was explaining a delay in the project due to the bully's team member prioritizing another project for another department, and the following word-for-word conversation happened. Me. And that's why I need to escalate this particular person's lack of prioritization of this work. Him. You just need to tell him to do it. Me. I see what you mean, but only you have final say in what he prioritizes. Him. Okay, what do you need me to do? Me. Decide if this project or another project is highest priority and direct your team member to work on that project. Him. I need you to write a one-pager for me on which project needs to be prioritized. That was the point that I checked out. Story 15. I started my current job, and not long after, my direct report was made redundant. It wasn't done in consultation with my boss, and he fought to keep her. After a while of me doing everything and being flat out, they admitted it was a mistake and said we could replace her. It took ages to get it signed off as they were trying to move the spend to the next financial year, etc. I got someone who he was basically rubbish and I was managing his performance. Constant mistakes, and I had to check all his work, which just gave me more work than not having him. My boss didn't help and said he basically didn't know what I did well enough to help manage him. Got someone else and who's been great. All was going well, then my boss left. The person temporarily overseeing us was rubbish, but it was only supposed to be a few months until they found a proper solution. I told myself it was temporary and cracked on. Turns out they've got rid of the same role again without understanding it. It's not a massive company either, so wouldn't have been a difficult thing to find out. Anyway, they've basically told me I can't drop anything despite having half the capacity. They've realized I do more than they imagined, including saving the company from other people's mistakes. They want me to do more at the same time. I have now lost all motivation. Story 16. A packet of crisps. Worked my butt off delivering a massive exhibition, which was a success in all measures. Even gave up a Friday/Saturday to be there and help with setup / the first day running smoothly. Way above my pay grade, but did a great job and thought it was appreciated. Drove home at stupid o'clock. On a Saturday night, I worked Monday to Friday office job and got caught in tons of traffic and wasn't home in time for tea. Stopped for petrol, considered getting a sandwich and thought, duck it, I'll grab some crisps and keep driving. Put the expenses through and my 1 pound 20 bag of crisps was denied by my manager because only evening meals were covered, and that was a snack. Never loaded up Indeed quicker. Story 17. Manager repeatedly tried to get rid of me, even though I'm one of the best worker, and everyone that I had worked with agreed that I was treated most harshly and unfairly than others. The constant bullying I had was a nightmare, and he was always having a go at me, but I needed the job and he had caused a lot of good workers to leave. I did extra hours and days. I did more than my colleague. Final straw when the manager successfully managed to get rid of another employee who worked there longer than I had by constantly bullying and shouting at him. And I left shortly after when he started to becoming toxic towards me and before he could try to fire me. This person always hired younger people, but not all of them last more than a year. Crazy thing is that he had many complaints about him, even from employees from other branches, but nothing was done and his job was meant to be given to someone else who'd been in the company for years. I believe that he may know someone from above to get the job. It's been a year now. I'm still looking for a job. I don't regret leaving, and at least I have taken time off to recover from all that and feel like a human being again. Story 18. My first job at 18 was in an art shop. I didn't know what to do after A-levels, so it was meant to be a nice summer job while I worked things out. There was the usual dog's body work that no one else wanted to do, running errands on my lunch, which took up my lunch, cleaning as the owner didn't trust a cleaner in the shop. This was 1998 and I was on £2.50 an hour, but I knew it wasn't forever, so got on with it. One day I sold a painting which was £500. We had a commission book to put painting sales in. I'd been told it was so you'd get commission of 10% from it. I was over the moon, as £50 was a decent amount, until I asked how I'd get the commission. Would it be in the next pay or as a one-off bonus? I was then told it was the 2 managers and the supervisor who'd get it, each getting a third of the commission. So I was the lowest paid, did all the dog's body work, and yet they'd get commission for something they'd had nothing to do with. I may have been wet behind the ears, but I wasn't stupid. I applied for another job that night and thankfully got it. Handing in that notice was amazing. Story 19. After a host of events that showed they were going to be crap employers, my favorite boss of the partnership pushed me too far. My terminally ill mom had a fall after returning from her last ever holiday that I missed because my 0-hour contract shifts couldn't possibly be covered. She smashed her head open while on blood thinners and I went to AE with her and my dad at about 11 p.m. I texted my boss at 4 a.m. saying I didn't think I'd be able to make my 8 a.m. start shift and why. He didn't ask after her or me, just told me I had to get there as soon as I was available, as they couldn't manage without me. This was a coffee shop and I was the only full-time employee excluding the two owners, both of whom were millionaires. So being the naive, undiagnosed autistic young woman I went in for the afternoon on no sleep and stayed late to make up for missing my usual shift. I even felt guilty for letting them down, as well as letting my mom by not being able to be with her yet again. Thankfully, the S went out of business after the pandemic, but I have never met people with such little empathy for others before or since. Story 20. 8 years I was at my old job and was there from the beginning when it was a small 4-man operation before we was bought out and the team grew to 30 members. I was the sole member of my design team that kept that side of the business afloat during COVID, while everyone else was on paid furlough. I gave up 3 weeks holiday just to make sure people kept their jobs and the workload stayed constant. However, the final straw was I was quite ill, sickness bug, and requested to work from home, could not face the travel, and sat in a warm office all day. I was told you either take the day off sick or come into the office sick, so I chose to take the day off. I chose to go in the next day, still a bit rough, but I could manage it. A member of my design team was off, so I asked where he was, and I was told, "Oh, he's sick. He's been working from home all week." Well, I kicked up a fuss about it and handed my notice in. I was also docked a day's wage for being off that day, even though no one else had been docked for being off sick during that month. Story 21. A junior left, and we were pretty good colleagues, so we spoke for like 3 hours under the pretense of training or handover or whatever, but in that call, she'd already alluded to loads of it. She spoke at some length at just how cheap the company was. For instance, she was asked to travel a good few hours by train to a meeting in an office that she wasn't normally working at, multi-office company, and the company wouldn't foot any of the bill to get her there. She wasn't making much as it was, and it was a drop in the ocean for the company, or so you'd think. That led to a very final straw of me eventually asking for a raise, getting told a pretty flat no mixed in with some bollocks about previous pay rises, although our fees had gone up massively since then. So I applied elsewhere and now have 25% more a month coming in, have to work in the office more, and it's a longer commute by a distance, but I'm happy to have the wool unpulled to story 22. Had a fellow manager come up to me shouting that I wasn't a team player, even though me and my team always finished early and then peeled off to help other departments. I was working with only one other person that night, as 2 of my team had gone sick and we had one of the biggest deliveries of the month. But because I said that night we wouldn't be able to help, we wasn't team players, even though he had seen us struggling and hadn't offered any help even when I'd asked. This was just the latest in a long line of the company just being selfish, rise holes, and other people just being petty. The following day, I went to see my sister, who got me a job in her warehouse, and went in that night with my letter of resignation, handed in my 4 weeks notice, and stepped down as manager with immediate effect. Every time I've left a job in the past, even up to the first few weeks after leaving, I've always had the nagging self-doubt, am I doing the right thing? From the moment I handed in my notice, all I felt was relief and comfort that the nightmare was coming to an end. Story 23. A previous job chipped me, and many colleagues, out of what amounted to a few £100 due to a change in policies, together with a derisory increase that year of something like 0.5% against 4% inflation. It meant I was effectively taking a hit, and the extra few £100 loss was just the icing on the cake. I pointed it out time and time again, and eventually HR said that they would give me a separate payment to make up for the few £100. But I would have to sign an NDA and could not tell anyone about the arrangement. I refused on grounds of complete impropriety. They came back and told me that everyone else who had complained were happy to sign it. I immediately started looking for jobs and got an offer within weeks for a 15% increase. Suddenly, after having been negotiating to get an increase of 3 or 4% for months and having gotten next to nothing and additionally being subject to a reduction of compensation of a few £100, they came back within a day with a counteroffer to match it. I told them not to worry about it. Story 24. Worked for 2 absolute idiot bosses. I was a department head and dual reported to ops and sales directors. Both were having a banana swinging competition using my mental health as the playing field. Enough was enough. Secured a new role, and roughly the same time I found out they were doing something that was against Ofcom regulations. So I walked into my MDS office on a Friday at 4, told them that they could all go duck themselves, those were my words, and that I wouldn't be working a notice period, and I knew what they were up to. This was after I told the head of compliance about the dodgy dealings in the presence of HR to protect myself, text my MD on Monday, my settlement figure, and walked into a new, better paying and highly enjoyable role 6 weeks later after an awesome holiday. Worked out to be the best boss and mentor I had to date at the new one. Kept my company car for 4 weeks and used my work mobile on holiday for 3 weeks too, just to rack up them data roaming charges. Story 25. I made a joke to a kid who would have been 6 after I'd let them do something they would not normally be allowed to do, cannot remember what. It was a sarcastic, "Fine, but you owe me a really big Christmas present for this" quip. A teaching assistant I did not get on with went straight to the deputy head, who then proceeded to take me out of the classroom and have a go at me. He claimed the child would not understand I was joking and that my joke was deeply irresponsible. I was already dreading and going to work every day and only getting 3 hours of sleep a night as it was. I nearly collapsed from exhaustion on my last day, and another teacher had to give me a lift home because I was in no fit state to get the bus. I loved working with kids, but lasted 3 months as a teacher because of how bad the system is.